All right, well, let's get started. I'm sure people will be entering, but I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining our Trailblazer webinar today. My name is Cheryl O'Connor. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Income Conductor, an award-winning retirement income planning technology that engages your clients in the planning process and delivers income certainty, not probability. Our Trailblazer series highlights the people in our industry who are forging new paths and developing new ways to achieve success while providing great outcomes for your clients. We welcome your questions, so please type them into the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll try to address them all at the end of the webinar. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our Trailblazer today, Paul Brandus, a columnist for Dow Jones, MarketWatch, and Washington Bureau Chief for Evergreen Podcasts. A speaker at 7 presidential libraries, Paul has been a member of the White House Press Corps and the White House Correspondents Association since 2008. A prolific author, Paul has written several books on the presidency, including Under This Roof, A History of the White House and Presidency, and This Day in the Presidency, which details significant events occurring each day of the year. Paul also writes a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for, This Week in Disinformation. Previously, Paul spent 5 years based in Moscow, including working as a U.S. Embassy staffer and then foreign correspondent, primarily for NBC Radio and the award-winning public radio business finance program, Marketplace. In addition to crisscrossing Russia for many years, he's reported from China, Iraq, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and many other locales. Paul has appeared on NBC's Today Show, CNN, PBS, C-SPAN, the BBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corp, and others, hosted a Voice of America Global Affairs program for 3 years, and is a weekly contributor to Washington's all-news WTOP radio. Welcome, Paul. I'm honored to have you as my Trailblazer guest this month.
Well, it's a great privilege for me to join you today, and I thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, it's just so timely with what we're going to talk about, which is communicating during times of crisis. But first off, let's start out with you sharing with our listeners how you started in the industry. And if you could, what led you to focus on the U.S. presidency and its role in world affairs in particular?
Well, I had actually worked in, you mentioned that I spent 5 years in Moscow. I spent a fair number of years after leaving the employ of the U.S. government, working on sort of the new emerging Russian economy, which has since imploded. But that gave me kind of a bug for business and all of that. And when I came back to the United States, I wound up living in New York for about 10 or 11 years, and I worked at CNBC producing shows there. Then I actually worked for a couple of financial firms. One was the Capital Group, which is the parent company of the American funds, which I think today has, about 2 trillion the T assets under management, and then things like that. And then I came down to Washington after getting married, and I'm a bit of a chameleon. I wanted to do something completely different, so I got out of the financial services industry and just became a journalist. And I got White House credentials and started going to the White House in the latter stages of the Bush era, George W. Bush, not the older one. And I've been there pretty much ever since. I mean, the entire Obama presidency, the first Trump presidency, then Biden, and now Trump again. So it's been a long ride, but it never ceases to interest me. And on the side, I continue to do these financial things, as you mentioned, for Dow Jones, writing a column, mostly on retirement issues, but some geopolitical stuff too. I really like the retirement angle, though. There's so much going on and so much concern about Social Security and Medicare, which I think we'll talk about in the next couple of minutes. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. We're delighted, but I think that's how we connected over the retirement space.
I
So
think so. Yeah.
yeah. So you reported on politics, traveled the globe, and seen firsthand how important effective communication can be, especially in times of crisis. So could you share with our listeners what lessons you feel history has taught us about how great leaders communicate, and conversely, how not so good leaders have ineffectively communicated on the flip side of the coin, and maybe share some examples of those instances that you've seen over the years?
Well, I've seen not just at the White House, but just in the business world. I mean, there are people who communicate well, and as you know, people who are not so good at that. Let's focus on the former. I think the people who do really well, and I think it's important, particularly in times like this, which are quite uncertain. It's more important than ever, I think, to have people, particularly in your industry, who can deliver information with clarity and intelligence and integrity. People like that are worth their weight in gold, certainly in your industry and in the political arena too. And I think since our time is limited, there are just a couple of things that over the years have stood out to me. And this has come through perhaps in some of the history books I've written and lectures I've delivered and that kind of thing. I think that when you look at the 20th century, two of the presidents we think of as being, say, great communicators relative to their times were probably Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy, yet both of them credited their mastery of the media, their speaking style, to another president, and that was Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was really the most influential president in terms of influencing those who followed in terms of their speaking style. What's interesting about FDR is I think everybody knows he was a very wealthy, a very patrician person, very much an elitist. But as a politician, he dispensed with all of that. And when he spoke with people, his famous fireside chats, I'm going back 90 years or so, he used simple words, took big, complex subjects, broke them down into easily understood concepts that people could understand in politics or finance. I think that's really interesting. You would never hear him talking in public, at least, about the Harvard man that he was. He always imagined himself leaning over a fence, chatting with a neighbor, just in simple conversational tones. And I think the message here for politicians and also for business people dealing with clients or prospective clients is keep your messaging simple and clear. It's very hard to do. Some are better at it than others, but a simple and clear is really the way to go. The next thing is you've got to stay on message. I think it's so important today because all of us, everyone on this call, we're all bombarded with stuff all day long. I mean, texts and phone
Mhm.
calls and emails and on and on and on. It's really just a tidal wave of stuff. And humans have a tendency, I think, to be reactive to what we hear and see. And folks have questions, I know, to you about how things like tariffs and wars and interest rates, how all of that could affect their portfolios, their strategies, and so forth. I think the best leaders I've seen in this regard are the ones who can somehow shut out all of the noise as best they can and just stay on message. Since we're talking about presidents, I think one of the best ones in terms of being able to stay on message was probably President Reagan. He was really good at sticking to his points, even early in his presidency. You might recall, anyone of a certain age, that when he took over, it was really a mess. Inflation and interest rates, 20%, I think, was the Fed funds rate, the peak. Reagan was under pressure to do something. He said, "We're going to stay the course." Excuse me. That was the famous phrase. I think it's even harder today because, again, we're just bombarded with things all day long. So, if anything, I think folks have got to work even harder at maintaining that message discipline and consistency, not being so reactive to everything that comes down the pike. I think that's just a really important uh, thing. The next thing is that, and I think people have heard this, but it's really hard to put in practice. If you want to be a great communicator, then try being a better listener. I think it's rather trite to say that, we've got one mouth but two ears, but it's true. And therefore, we should perhaps listen twice as much as we speak, but that's hard for people to do. I think whenever you're in a conversation with someone, you're not so much listening to them as thinking about what you're going to say next. The people who are really good communicators have found a way to master that. And I'll give you a quick story about one business leader. I mentioned that I worked at CNBC and NBC for quite a while. This was in the General Electric era when Jack Welch he was the man, as you know.
Mhm.
And the first time I met Welch was at some event in the city. I think it was a big party for CNBC or something. I'd never met him before and I was nervous, but I went up to him and I chatted. And as important as Jack Welch was, I remember that 60-second conversation clearly when I was speaking with him. He put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me and listened very carefully as if I was the most important person in the room, which obviously I was not. But that's how he made me feel. That vignette, again, was all of a minute, but he made me feel like $1,000,000 for the way that he paid attention to me. So I think listening is just a very underrated skill. And people like him and certain politicians are really good at it. I think one of the best of all the presidents that I've met, probably the best listener in those terms, was probably President Obama. When you spoke
Mhm.
with him, just like Welch, love him or hate him, he was clearly a quite successful politician, a very good listener. When you spoke with him, he looked at you as if there was no one else around, even if it was only a very short conversation, as any conversation with the president usually is. It tends to be pretty short, but the best ones look at you as if you really matter. So it's really important to listen. And again, very hard for people to do. Notice, by the way, I'm praising a conservative Republican like the late Jack Welch and a liberal Democrat like President Obama. I mean, these are skills that obviously transcend party lines, I think.
Exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
I'm sorry. Let me speed up here. I think because our time is limited. The other
Yeah.
thing I think that is important is emotional intelligence. I think everybody knows what that is, but it's a really important leadership tool. You've got to connect emotionally with whoever your audience is, whether it's one
Mhm.
person or whether you're in a room with a couple of hundred people. For politicians, that's voters and constituents. For you, it's clients and potential clients. The best leaders are really good at making others feel valued. It's a very amorphous thing, hard to define, but it's a very powerful thing. And just finally, the other thing I think that stands out for me is that the good communicators have learned to master the technology of their era, be it television in the 60s and the internet in the 90s, and now social media is the big thing. I think one of the most important platforms today for either a politician or even a business person is YouTube, which is really the king of the streaming channels. A lot of people don't know. A lot of politicians understand this, but YouTube now gets more eyeballs than Netflix, if you can believe it.
Mhm.
I see a lot of financial advisors still send out old fashioned emails, and there's nothing wrong with that. But younger clients and perhaps future clients, if you want to connect with them, chances are they're not going to be reading emails. They're going to be looking at the platforms like YouTube and Instagram and things like that. I do understand, though, that because of certain Sarbanes-Oxley and regulations and such, you got to be careful with what you say, but you can still connect with people on the platforms where those customers are.
Well, it's a very flexible platform. You can do a lot with it.
Yeah,
Some of the other platforms are very limited.
I think so.
Um, going back to Reagan, I wonder if his acting training helped him, because his whole thing was connecting with the audience, right? And really making them feel as though they were part of what was going on. And uh, I sent you a link. I just got a Cerulli white paper today where they did a study where communicating with empathy to clients, especially during times of crisis, is probably the most important thing when clients were surveyed, that they want to feel heard
Yep.
and understood and listened to. So I think, the surveys pan out what you're saying.
Yeah. Empathy and emotional intelligence and good
Yep.
listening are skills that will get you far in any line of work, I think, but particularly, I think, in yours.
Mhm. So we've seen a lot of turbulence over the past year in the global markets and, the political environment throughout the world. And investors are understandably very nervous. So how, without getting into political sides, what advice would you give to advisors when clients come to them and ask them, how is the Middle East going to impact my portfolio? What about Social Security? What do you think is going to happen in Congress? Those are questions that immediately I think advisors want to go have a go-to answer for. What would you advise them to say to their
Well,
clients?
well, everybody wants answers right away.
Yeah.
But with an issue, let's get the Middle East out of the way. I mean, it's impossible to answer that. Nobody knows. I mean, we're talking about something that could play out over days, weeks, months, years. I'd be
Mhm.
really, I think it's a fool's errand to say, okay, we bombed Iran over the weekend. What does that mean? I would just candidly say, I don't know. There are too many moving parts here to really give any honest answer. The best answer is, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But that just speaks to the standard messaging that I think that clients should always have, which is you've got to stay diversified. You've got to keep your eye on your plan, whatever that is. Every client is different in terms of age and tolerance for risk and investment goals and everything. Everyone is different, but
Mhm.
you got to be diversified, and don't try and be reactive. Again, as I mentioned earlier, don't react to the headlines. I saw that the oil went up quickly, and now oil is actually below where it was last
Within a
week. I mean,
day.
you can't, you really can't. It's just kind of a fool's game to try and,
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that. That's why I was sort of, I think we all know the sort of the lore of Warren Buffett, all the smart things that he said over the years, and one of which obviously is, I'd be happy if the stock market just closed for the next, couple of years. It's not bad advice, but again, people don't necessarily think that way. So
Yeah, I
the
mean, I talk to advisors a lot, and over the past maybe 2 to 3 years, there's been a consistent theme of them frustrated at the divisiveness and the tendency for people taking a certain political side to also have a certain financial view that they feel very strongly about, that their leaders may be, you know, talking about as just their agenda, but it might not be, relative to what is actually going on in the world right now. So how do they communicate with people, in your view, effectively, and break through that partisan noise? You must deal with this as a journalist.
It's frustrating to see this, and you look at this is
Mhm.
a Social Security and Medicare
Oh, yeah.
story that I'll tell you. I'll bet you're getting a lot of you and I bet you're getting a lot of questions about these entitlements. As you know, the Social Security trustees issued their report last week. It said that the trust fund is due to run out by 2033, and unless something is done, benefits are going to be cut, I think, 23%. The Medicare insurance trust fund, I think that's the H fund, will be depleted that year as well, 3 years earlier than reported. When people read these headlines, it's
Mhm.
understandable that they get nervous, particularly when you look at the data. Millions of Americans have so little saved. And the stats are, let me scroll down here, 2/5 of beneficiaries rely on Social Security for at least half of their income.
Mhm.
12% of men, 15% of women rely on it for 90% or more of their income. In other words, utter dependency. So when you read these headlines about how the trust fund is going to go bust in fiscal year 2026 starts in October, we're just a
Mhm.
couple of years away here. And what's frustrating about that is nothing has been done about Social Security since 1983 when Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who fought like alley cats during the day, but they were at least civil about it, sat down and realized, look, we've got to do something. They compromised and they
Mhm.
fixed it. Reagan wound up signing off on essentially a tax hike to boost Social Security, and the time of the retirement age was raised and all that kind of thing. That's going to happen again. But the problem is, and this is not just applicable to the Social Security problem, but other issues as well, is that the polarization has gotten so intense. The middle
Mhm.
ground in terms of political moderates has really been hollowed out. The extremes are such that it's so hard for people. You can't even get people to sit down and have a cup of coffee anymore. It's really bad. So you tell me, after the last thing was done about this in 40 years, what do you tell your clients?
Right.
Really, the messaging is really hard. We keep hoping that,
Mhm.
okay, it'll be the bottom of the ninth and they'll figure something out. But they haven't been able to do it uh, yet. And the clock is ticking. I mean, I think everybody understands that the basic ideas here are the same. Either you lift the cap on income that's subject to Social Security taxes, which is about 176,000 and change. Because of longer life expectancy, you're going to have to gradually raise the retirement age a little bit more. That's a de facto cut if you make people wait a little bit longer. And obviously, Republicans will kick and scream about a tax hike, but that also is the basis for a compromise, with each side giving up something that they really don't want to uh, give up. I just don't know how they get around that. And so, for people who are worried about that, I think you just have to be honest about it and say it's a very difficult situation, but it just suggests that the burden is going to be on people to keep working longer. That's not what people want to hear. Save as much as they can. I think people are doing their best, but savings
Mhm.
are really quite, we live in two countries. I mean, there's a wide swath of the country, Cheryl, that has very little saved for retirement.
Mhm.
And I have a feeling they're probably not your clients, but it's a very, very disturbing situation. And again, the fact that these politicians can barely even be in the same room with each other is just it's just a deeply disturbing.
Well, compromise has turned into a four-letter word lately.
It really has.
It's a badge of dishonor, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the advisors that we work with are focusing on long-term retirement income planning, which, entails funding the client's cash flow needs over the next 25, 30, even 35 years. So,
Mm.
Social Security is part of that equation, and there's a lot of uncertainty about that, which is unfortunate, but I think you're being honest about it and, not trying to whitewash it is probably best, and listening empathetically and communicating effectively about it is important, so.
It's a painful subject, and my fear is that there are going to be people in a couple of years who are going to be facing a great deal of pain. Even now, you
Mhm.
read anecdotally about older folks, God bless them, who have to choose between food on the fridge or their meds. I mean, what kind of a
Right,
choice is that to make? But I think
yeah.
we've all heard stories about that. And ancillary to that, by the way, is sort of the healthcare angle. I think everybody knows about Fidelity Investments. Every year they come out with an estimate for healthcare costs above and beyond what Medicare will pay for, and it's indexed to inflation and everything. And I think the
Mhm.
latest figure is that someone at age 65 now is going to have to come up with about 165,000 to pay for health care, again above and beyond what Medicare will cover. A lot of people have nothing like that saved to begin with, and that's only health care.
Yeah.
It's really a very frightening scenario.
Yeah, it's important to have those projections. We bring in personalized healthcare expenses into our planning technology so that, people have the data they need to make those decisions. Should I retire now? Can I meet my expenses, or should I work longer? Maybe that's, the real conversation to have with
Yep.
pre-retirees.
Yep.
We are going up against the half hour, and I know we wanted to talk about, you've got your ear to the ground in Washington, and it's a very important subject for everybody in the financial industries. What do you hear about possible regulatory changes that could affect our industry?
Well, I gave a talk on this back in January to a similar group, and I said there's a very narrow window here because midterm elections are now just what, 18, 19 months away. It's interesting to note that President Trump has been back in the White House for 5 months now. Republicans control both chambers in Congress, the House and the Senate. And yet, despite this hammerlock on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, not one major piece of legislation has been passed. Nothing.
Hmm.
Renamed a couple of post offices and some other things, but no major legislation has passed. It's quite interesting. This big, beautiful bill is in trouble for a lot of reasons. I mean, the SALT issue is just a kind of one high profile thing. So I really wonder how much is going to get, in terms of legislation, what's going to get through. There are various executive orders that he can issue that could change things. But let me give you just a quick rundown on some of the things that they're trying to do and some of the things that have already, again, so through some of these actions that have already been done. I mean, the first is sort of in the banking and financial oversight area. They've repealed this Biden era rule that tightens scrutiny over bank mergers. I think there could be some M&A activity there. They want the Fed to ease these capital requirements. They claim it could boost lending and spur economic growth. That hasn't happened quite yet. I think everybody's heard about the demise, at least on paper, of the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that got doged, which is now a verb, I guess.
Mhm.
Funding was slashed, a lot of staffers let go, the net result of which is diminished consumer protections. Some folks argue that these regulations are needed, pointing to past abuses. Others say, no, they're too excessive. You be the judge of whether it's too excessive or not. But things like predatory lending, overdraft fees, late fees, those are now going up because they've done away with protections in that
Hmm.
regard. The other thing that's interesting, keep your eye on something called the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. This is not an area of particular expertise for me, but legislation has been proposed that would abolish this, that would transfer a lot of its duties to the SEC. Critics claim this could undermine audit quality and investor protection. And then there is something that I do know a fair amount about, just if nothing based on my time in Russia, and that's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The Trump administration has actually paused the enforcement of this, which I think everybody understands has prohibited American companies from bribing foreign officials, which now raises new concerns about corporate accountability. Critics argue this will make overseas bribery a legitimate business activity. I think that's a really big deal. And the final one is something that I think the Trump, not just president himself, but the first family is intensely interested in, and that's this crypto deregulation. They really rolled back or paused a lot of rules against crypto firms, including Binance and Coinbase and all of the rest. And they're certainly promoting cryptocurrencies every chance they get. And it's not a sign of political bias to point out, that's fair to note, that his family has profited rather handsomely from some of these things. It's not a partisan statement. It's just an objective statement of fact. So there's some personal issues involved in some of these policy changes, I think. And then in general, also this issue about wanting to speed up various deregulations. He has what he calls a 10-to-1 rule, that for every one new regulation, whatever it is, 10 old ones have to go. That's not been going so well, but
arbitrary 10 to 1.
10 to 1. 10 to 1. So
okay.
10 old regulations out for every new one in, but there's been not gotten a lot of traction with that so far.
Well, I think
that's kind of a quick summary.
Yeah, I think everybody in the industry would agree that, some of the regulation just doesn't make sense. And it really puts a burden on the financial advisory space, when they can't serve their clients because of the mountain of paperwork that is required just to open up an account and transfer and invest money. But
I agree.
As you say, there are some things that are there to protect the consumer, to protect the investor, and that's all of us, right? We're all invested. So some of these things we should keep our eye on. But we are past the half hour. We do have a question, and I'm so glad Mike asked. How do we get your newsletter? I signed up for it via a LinkedIn post, but Mike went out to your website and did not see any information on signing up for your disinformation weekly newsletter.
Oh, really? Well, I'm new to Substack, so I guess I'm trying to figure it out. I've only been doing it for 2 weeks, but other people have been getting it. But send me his email, and I'll look into it.
I will.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful.
And I apologize for the consumer. That's poor consumer service. I'm embarrassed. I'll try and fix that.
Well, it's a wonderful newsletter, and I really want to thank you so much for joining us today, Paul. I mean, you're always just an encyclopedia of information every time I talk with you, and I know you care very much about the country, and especially, as you said, about the future of retirement for our citizens. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your views on how to communicate effectively.
Well, it's my pleasure. Just a great honor to be with you, and thanks so much for your time.
All right, take care. Thank you, everybody, and watch for next month's Trailblazer webinar.